He planned this from the beginning.
Margaret Harris had always believed that loyalty was the most sacred thing a person could carry in this world. She had watched her own mother stay faithful to a man who tested her every single day, and Margaret had grown up convinced that love without loyalty was just a beautiful lie wrapped in pretty paper. So when she married Calvin Harris on a warm September evening in Atlanta, Georgia, she believed with everything inside her that she had finally found the kind of man her mother had always prayed she would find. Calvin was steady and calm, and the kind of man who remembered the small things. He remembered that she hated the sound of ice crunching, and he remembered that she always needed one lamp on when she slept, and he remembered the name of the teacher who had humiliated her in the 7th grade, even though she had only mentioned it once 3 years into their relationship. That kind of man. But there was another man in their lives. His name was Derek Cole. And from the very beginning, something about Derek made the hair on the back of Margaret's neck stand up in a way she could never quite explain. Not loudly, not obviously, just quietly. The way a house can feel wrong before you ever find out what is wrong with it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Calvin and Derek had grown up together in Savannah, Georgia. They had gone to the same elementary school and played on the same high school football team, and when Calvin started his commercial real estate firm in Atlanta, Derek had been right beside him as his business partner. To the outside world, they were a success story. Two men from nothing who had built something real together. But Margaret had always seen the cracks that other people missed. Derek was magnetic in the way that dangerous things are magnetic. He walked into a room and people turned to look, and he knew it, and he used it the way a card player uses a good hand. He dated women the way some people scroll through television channels looking for something interesting and moving on the moment something better appeared. Calvin used to laugh about it. He would say Derek is just free-spirited honey. He is not a bad man, he just has not found the right woman yet. Margaret would smile and say nothing, but she always noticed the way Derek looked at her sometimes when Calvin was not watching. Not aggressively, not obviously, just a half-second too long. Just enough to make her feel like he was filing something away. She told herself she was imagining it. She was wrong. Now here is something Margaret did not know and would not know for a very long time. Derek's obsession with her had not started recently. It had started the night Calvin first told him about her. They had been sitting on the back porch of Derek's house in Buckhead 2 years before the wedding, drinking bourbon, and Calvin had said, "Man, I think I found her." Derek had looked over. Calvin said her name. He described the way she laughed. He described the way she thought. He described the feeling of being around her like standing in a room where all the furniture is exactly where it should be. And something in Derek's chest had tightened in a way he did not want to examine. He had smiled and raised his glass. He had said, "That is beautiful, brother. I am happy for you." But underneath that smile something else was running. Something that did not have a clean name. He had pushed it down. He had told himself it was nothing. But it did not stay down. It never stayed down. The first time Derek met Margaret at a dinner at Calvin's apartment, he had shaken her hand and looked at her and thought, "I understand exactly what he meant." And then he had thought something else. Something that he would not say out loud to anyone. He had thought she should have been mine. That thought was the seed. And Derek Cole was a patient man. He was willing to wait a very long time for the right season to plant it. Now, while all of this was happening on the surface, there was something else happening underneath it. Something that Calvin and Margaret and all of their friends and colleagues could not see. Because Derek Cole had a secret that went back 15 years to the summer he spent in rural Louisiana visiting his grandmother before she passed. His grandmother's name was Eula May, and she had lived alone in a small white house at the end of a dirt road outside of Breaux Bridge, Louisiana for 40 years. Everyone in that parish knew Eula May. Not for anything you could easily explain to someone who had not grown up there. They knew her the way communities know certain people, with a quiet respect that had something underneath it. Something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. The summer Derek turned 23, he drove down to see her because she had called him and said, "Boy, you need to come before I go." He arrived on a Tuesday evening. The house smelled like dried herbs and candle wax and something else he could not name. something earthy and old. Eula May was sitting in her rocking chair on the porch with a small cedar box on her lap. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Derek, you have always wanted what you could not have, and one day that wanting is going to eat you alive unless you feed it right." He did not know what she meant. She opened the cedar box. Inside, wrapped in red cloth, was a small dark bottle. The glass was old and thick, and the liquid inside was the color of dark amber. She said, "This has been in our family for 4 generations. Every woman my grandfather ever wanted came to him. Every woman my father ever wanted came to him." She paused. She said, "But there is a cost that comes with old things like this. You do not use this lightly. You do not use this out of jealousy or cruelty. Because old things know the difference. And old things collect what they are owed." Derek had taken the bottle. He had driven back to Atlanta. He had put it in the back of his dresser drawer and mostly forgotten about it. Mostly. Until Calvin said her name on that back porch. Until the seed took root. 18 months before the October night everything came apart, Derek took the bottle out of the drawer for the first time in 15 years. He held it in his hands. He thought about his grandmother's voice. He thought about the warning. He told himself he would be careful. He told himself this was different. He found a photograph of Margaret from Calvin's social media. He followed the instructions his grandmother had written in a small leather notebook tucked inside the cedar box. The handwriting was faded but legible. He lit a candle. He spoke her name into the flame 3 times. Margaret started having strange dreams that same week. She did not connect them to anything. She mentioned the first one to Calvin over breakfast. She said, "I dreamed about a dark room and a door I could not open, and someone was calling my name from the other side, but I could not tell if the voice was friendly or not." Calvin said, "Honey, you are working too hard." She let it go. But the dreams kept coming. Every 3 or 4 nights. Always the same dark room. Always the same door. Always that voice. And then something else began. A fog. Not a physical fog. An interior fog. A feeling of being slightly removed from herself. As if she were watching her own life through frosted glass. Her best friend Sandra called her one Wednesday morning and said, "Margaret, something is off with you lately." "What do you mean, Sandra?" "I mean, you seem distant. You seem like you are not quite present. You seem like something is pulling at you from somewhere I cannot see." Margaret laughed it off. But that night, alone in the bathroom, she looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. And she had the uncomfortable feeling that something was looking back at her that should not have been there. She shook her head. She splashed cold water on her face. She went to bed. She dreamed about the dark room again. Meanwhile, Derek was watching her carefully. He noticed the slight distance in her eyes at their next group dinner. He noticed the way she reached for her water glass and paused for just a moment as if she had forgotten what she was doing. He noticed these things and he felt something he was not proud of. Satisfaction. He accelerated his work with the bottle. He burned the candle more frequently. He spoke her name more often. And then something happened that he had not planned for. The bottle cracked. Not broke. Cracked. A thin hairline fracture running from the base to the neck of the glass. He stared at it for a long time. He remembered what his grandmother had said. Old things know the difference. He wrapped the bottle back in the red cloth. He put it back in the drawer. He told himself it was just old glass. He told himself it meant nothing. But he did not sleep well that night. Or the night after. Now let us talk about what Margaret was experiencing during those months, because she has described it since and her description is important. She said it was not like being controlled. It was more like being persuaded from the inside. Like her own instincts were being slowly rewritten. She said things that had always felt wrong began to feel complicated. She said her guard, which had always been strong around Derek, began to feel like an overreaction. She said she started to think maybe she had misjudged him. Maybe he was just a friend of her husband's who deserved more grace than she had given him. She said she started to feel a low-level pull toward him that disturbed her deeply whenever she was clear enough to notice it. And she said the clearest moments were always in the early morning, before she was fully awake, when she could feel herself again completely. And in those moments she would lie still and think something is wrong with me. Something is not right. But then the day would start and the fog would settle back in and those clear morning thoughts would fade like dreams themselves. This is what Derek Cole had done to her. This is what the bottle had made possible. And the worst part, the truly worst part, was that no one around her could see it. Not Calvin. Not Sandra. Not her pastor. Not anyone. She was alone inside it. Completely alone. The opportunity Derek had been building toward finally arrived when a major development contract in Houston, Texas, required someone to travel for 3 weeks to manage the final stages of negotiations. Derek arranged it. He arranged it specifically so that Calvin would be the one to go. He pitched it as an honor. He said, "Calvin, you are the best man for this job. I trust you completely with this." Calvin was flattered. He did not question it. Why would he? This was his best friend of 30 years. The night before Calvin left, Margaret packed his suitcase. She stood in their bedroom doorway watching him zip up his bags, and she had a feeling she could not name. Not quite dread. Something older than dread. Something that felt the way the air feels before a storm breaks over flat land. She almost said something. Calvin looked up from his suitcase and smiled at her. That smile she had fallen in love with. She closed her mouth. She told herself she was being irrational. She kissed him goodbye at Hartsfield-Jackson the next morning and drove home alone. The house was very quiet. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the quiet for a moment. Then she made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table and told herself 3 weeks was nothing. 3 weeks would be fine. She was wrong about that too. Now, before we go any further, I want you to feel the weight of what Margaret was walking into. Because she was not a careless woman. She was not an unfaithful woman. She was not a woman with wandering eyes or a restless heart. She was a woman who had been chemically and spiritually interfered with by a man who had spent 18 months preparing for a single night. And she walked into that night with almost none of her natural defenses intact. The fog had seen to that. Derek had seen to that. Keep that in mind as this story continues. Because what happened was not her fault. And the story of how she reclaimed herself from it is the part that matters most. The weekend of Derek's birthday, he called Margaret and told her Calvin had specifically asked him to reach out. He said Calvin wanted to make sure she was not alone that evening and that she felt included in the celebration. This was a lie. Calvin had mentioned it casually and Derek had taken it and shaped it into something else entirely. Margaret agreed to come for 1 hour. She drove to Derek's home in Buckhead on a Saturday evening in October. The house was large and lit warmly. There were perhaps 30 guests moving through the rooms. Music playing low. Margaret stayed near the edges. She knew a few people and made polite conversation. She checked her watch at 9:15. At 9:30 she went to find her coat. Derek appeared at her side as if he had been watching for exactly this moment. Which he had been. He told her about the traffic accident on 285. He named the specific exit. He said the roads were backed up for miles. He said, "Please let me drive you. It would make Calvin feel better." She paused. She said, "Okay." In the car, Derek spoke about Calvin, about their friendship, about how much he respected their marriage, about what a rare thing it was to find the kind of love they had. By the time they hit the gridlock on the connector, Margaret had relaxed slightly. Derek said they should go back and wait it out. He said, "I will call Calvin right now if you want." That made her feel safer. She said, "Okay." 1 hour. Back at the house, the last guests were gone. Derek poured her a glass of water. He sat across from her and they talked. And the fog was heavy that night. Heavier than it had ever been. Margaret would later say it was like sitting underwater. She could see everything but her responses were slow. Her instincts were muffled. Her sense of danger, which had always been sharp, had gone almost completely silent. Derek complained of a sudden headache. He pressed his hand to his temple. Margaret, who had spent her entire career caring for people in crisis, moved toward him without thinking. And that was the moment he had spent 18 months building toward. What happened next? Margaret has never described in full detail publicly. And she does not have to. What matters is that she woke up the next morning in a room that was not hers. In a bed that was not hers. with a truth pressing down on her chest so heavy she could barely breathe. Derek was standing in the doorway already dressed. He looked at her with a calmness that was more frightening than anger would have been. He said, "There is a morning after pill in the drawer if you need one." Margaret stared at him. She said, "You planned all of this." He did not answer. He held up his phone and turned the screen toward her. A photograph, taken while she slept. Her in the frame, his arm around her. The image absolutely clear. She felt the floor drop out from under her. She said, "Jason, you took a picture of us while I was sleeping." He said, "Consider it insurance." He said, "If you say one word to Calvin or anyone else, this photograph goes to your husband tonight." And then he said something that revealed exactly how long he had been planning this. He said, "I have been waiting 2 years for this, Margaret. 2 years. And now that I have you, I do not intend to let you go." Margaret grabbed her things. She ran. She did not stop until she reached the street. She got into a rideshare with her hands shaking so badly she could barely type the address. She sat in the back of that car with tears running silently down her face, and the driver did not say a word, and she was grateful for that. She sat in the parking garage of her building for 50 minutes after she arrived home. She could not go upstairs. She could not sit in the home she shared with Calvin and hold this. She sat in the garage alone and fell apart completely. And when she was done falling apart, she wiped her face. She went upstairs. She sat in the kitchen. And she thought about what she was going to do. Now here is where the fog began to lift. Not completely. Not yet. But something had shifted. Something about the shock of the morning. The cold clarity of Derek's face. The photograph. Something had cracked the fog the way cold water cracks sleep. And in the clearer air, Margaret began to feel something she recognized. Anger. Not panic. Not shame. Anger. And underneath the anger, something older and steadier. The self she had been before any of this started. She was still in there. Still intact. Still herself. But she did not know yet how to reach her. Calvin came home from Houston 3 weeks later with flowers and a smile and that familiar warmth she had fallen in love with. He had closed the deal. He was proud. He was happy. He wanted to celebrate. Margaret held him at the airport and closed her eyes and felt the weight of everything she was carrying. That night at dinner, Calvin reached across the table and took her hand. He said, "I missed you every single day." She looked at him. She said, "I missed you too." And she meant it completely. And it nearly destroyed her. 2 weeks after Calvin returned, the blackmail began. Derek called her at her office on a Tuesday morning. His voice was easy and casual, as if he were calling to discuss lunch. He gave her a hotel name and a room number. He gave her 1 hour. Margaret sat at her desk after the call with her hand still on the phone. Her assistant knocked and asked if she was ready for her 10 o'clock meeting. She said, "Give me 5 minutes." She sat there for those 5 minutes and thought about everything she had built. Her marriage, her career, her self-respect. She thought about the photograph. She thought about Calvin's face if he ever saw it. She thought about her mother's Bible with the note inside. "Whatever comes, keep your heart right." She picked up her phone. She called Sandra. Sandra answered on the second ring. Margaret said, "I need to see you tonight." Sandra heard something in her voice and said, "I will be there at 7. That evening, Margaret told Sandra everything. Sandra sat very still through all of it. When Margaret finished, Sandra looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Margaret, this man has been operating on you. This did not happen because of anything you did or did not do." Margaret started to cry. Sandra held her. She said, "We are going to figure this out together." "But Margaret, you cannot go to that hotel. You cannot let him have that power over you. You understand me?" Margaret nodded. She did not go to the hotel. Derek waited in that hotel room for 3 hours. He called her twice. She did not answer. He texted her the photograph again. She did not respond. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed, and for the first time since this had begun, he felt something other than confidence. He felt the cold edge of uncertainty. He went home. He opened the dresser drawer. He took out the red cloth. He unwrapped the bottle. The crack had spread. It ran now from the base almost all the way to the neck. a jagged dark line through the old glass. He stared at it. He thought about his grandmother's voice. He thought about the warning. He thought about the cost that comes with old things. He put it back. He sat on his bed for a long time in the dark. And across the city, in Sandra's living room, Margaret Harris felt something she had not felt in months. She felt like herself. Derek escalated. He showed up at her office building the following week. He sat in his car in the parking structure and called her and told her to come down immediately. Margaret looked at her phone. She went downstairs. She got into his car. Derek handed her an envelope. Inside were divorce papers. He told her to give them to Calvin. He told her their marriage was already over whether she accepted it or not. He told her she belonged to him now. Margaret looked at those papers for a long time. She looked at Derek's face. And something inside her that had been bending for months went completely still. She said, "Derek, I want you to hear me clearly. I am not afraid of you. I am going to handle this. And whatever happens after that is between you and God." She got out of his car. She walked back into her building. She sat at her desk and she breathed. And then she called Mother Cecile. Mother Cecile was 81 years old and had lived in the sweet Auburn neighborhood of Atlanta for 60 years. She was not a doctor or a therapist or a pastor. She was something older than all of those things. A woman of deep prayer and deep sight and the kind of quiet authority that does not need to announce itself. Margaret had known her since childhood. Her own grandmother had taken her to Mother Cecile's house once when Margaret was 9 years old. She remembered the smell of the house. Herbs and candle wax and something clean underneath it all. She had not been back in 30 years. She drove there that afternoon without calling ahead. Mother Cecile opened the door before Margaret reached the porch. She looked at her for a long moment. She said, "Child, I have been waiting for you for 3 weeks. Come in and sit down." Margaret sat at the kitchen table. The kitchen was exactly as she remembered it. The same herbs hanging from the ceiling. The same amber jars lined along the window. The same quality of light that felt different from ordinary afternoon light. Fuller somehow. Mother Cecile put a cup of tea in front of her. She sat across from her and folded her hands. She said, "Tell me everything." Margaret told her everything. Every detail. Including the fog and the dreams and the door she could not open and the voice calling her name. Including the morning she woke up in Derek's house. Including the photograph. Including the divorce papers. Including the feeling she had described to Sandra of being watched from the inside. When she finished, Mother Cecile was quiet for a very long time. The kitchen was completely silent. Then the old woman said, "Someone worked against you with old hands. Old Southern hands. Hands that knew what they were doing." Margaret felt the truth of that land somewhere below her ribs. She said, "Can it be undone?" Mother Cecile said, "Old hands can always be unwound by older ones. But first," she said, "you must stop being ashamed. Because shame is the lock they put on your voice. And as long as you are silent, you are still in the room with him." She reached into the cabinet behind her. She set a small bottle on the table between them. The glass, not fractured. Pieces. 6 or 7 fragments of old dark glass lying in the red cloth like something that had simply decided it was finished. He stared at it for a very long time. He thought about his grandmother's voice. He thought about the cost that comes with old things. He thought about the crack that had appeared and spread and finally given way. He stood there in the dark of his bedroom at 2 in the morning holding a handful of broken old glass. And for the first time since all of this had begun, Derek Cole was afraid. Not of Margaret. Not of Calvin. Not of anything he could name. Just afraid. The way a man is afraid when he realizes that the forces he has been borrowing from have decided to call in what he owes. He swept the pieces back into the red cloth. He wrapped it tightly. He put it in a bag. He drove to a dumpster 3 blocks away at 2:30 in the morning in his pajamas and threw it away. He drove home. He sat in his car in his own driveway for 20 minutes. He went back inside. He did not sleep again that night. The following week, Margaret received a phone call from a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end identified himself as Special Agent Raymond Torres of the FBI's Atlanta field office. He said he was conducting an investigation into international wire fraud connected to a series of offshore accounts and shell companies tied to Derek Cole's business dealings in Dubai and Houston. He said he understood that her husband Calvin Harris had been working with Derek Cole as a business partner. He said he wanted to assure her that Calvin was not a subject of the investigation. He said Calvin had in fact been fully cooperative after inadvertently forwarding an internal report to the wrong client during his time in Houston. That client had flagged it to regulators. The investigation had been underway for 14 months. They had more than enough. He said officers would be visiting Mr. Cole that afternoon. Margaret sat down slowly after the call ended. She sat at her kitchen table with her hand flat on the table surface. She looked at her hand for a long time. She thought about Mother Cecile's words. Covenanted things cannot be fully taken. She picked up the clear bottle from the counter where she kept it now. She held it in both hands. She said thank you out loud to no one she could see. But she meant it for everyone who was listening. When officers arrived at Derek's home that afternoon, he opened the door himself. He looked past them briefly at the street as if expecting something else. Then he looked back at them. The morning was very quiet. He was taken in handcuffs. He did not fight it. He did not speak. He walked to the police vehicle with a stillness about him that the arresting officer later described as a man who had been expecting this for some time. As if somewhere underneath all of his calculation and planning and patience, he had always known this was where it ended. The dark bottle in pieces in a dumpster 3 blocks away. His grandmother's warning finally collected on. That afternoon Margaret received a text from an unknown number. Contained 4 words. The photograph is gone. She read it twice. She set the phone face down on the table. She pressed both palms flat against the table and breathed. And then she got up and she started making dinner. Because Calvin was coming home. And she had something to tell him. She waited until after dinner. Calvin was in the living room reading when she came and sat across from him. She said, "Calvin, I need to tell you something and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." He looked at her face. He set his book down. He said, "Okay." And she told him everything. From the beginning. The fog and the dreams. The night of Derek's birthday. What she remembered and what she did not. The photograph. The blackmail calls. The divorce papers. Sandra. Mother Cecile. The clear bottle. All of it. She told it steadily and completely without stopping, and when she finished she sat with her hands folded in her lap and waited. Calvin did not speak for a long time. The room was very quiet. Then he stood up. He said, "I need some air." He went out to the back porch. Margaret sat in the living room and listened to the night sounds outside and waited. She thought about her mother's note in the Bible. Whatever comes, keep your heart right. After a long time she heard Calvin come back to the door. He came inside. He sat back down across from her. His eyes were red. He said, "Margaret." She looked at him. He said, "I am angry." He paused. He said, "I am angry at Derek and I am angry at myself for trusting him without question for 30 years, and I am angry that you had to carry any of this alone even for one day." She started to say something. He held up his hand gently. He said, "But I am not angry at you." He said, "What happened to you was done to you. And the fact that you are sitting here telling me the truth right now, when you could have stayed silent and I never would have known, that tells me everything about who you are." He reached across the table. She took his hand. And something that had been broken for months. Not their marriage. Not their love. But the air between them. The clear air of full knowing. Something that had been broken finally came back together. Derek Cole was indicted on 11 counts of international wire fraud. The charges included falsified development contracts across 4 states and 2 countries. Offshore accounts totaling nearly $4 million in misappropriated funds. And coercion charges filed after Margaret gave her formal statement to investigators. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. It did not hold. He accepted a plea agreement 8 months later. He was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. On the day of sentencing, Calvin sat in the courtroom and watched his former best friend of 30 years be led away. He sat very still. He did not look satisfied. He did not look vindicated. He looked like a man mourning something, because that is what it was. A mourning. For a friendship that had never been what he believed it was. For 30 years of trust placed in someone who had been calculating against him beneath the surface of it all. He drove home in silence. Margaret was waiting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee. She looked at his face when he walked in. She did not ask him how he felt. She pushed 1 cup toward him. He sat down. They drank their coffee together in the quiet. The recovery was not fast. It never is. Calvin and Margaret saw a counselor every week for 8 months. They sat with their pastor. They sat with Mother Cecile together one evening in that kitchen full of herbs and amber jars and that different quality of light. Mother Cecile looked at them both for a long time. She said, "You have come through something that breaks most people." She said you came through because you chose truth over comfort. She said that is rarer than people know. Calvin reached over and took Margaret's hand. Mother Cecile smiled. She said, "Now go home and build something that nothing can touch." Margaret went back to her social work. She went back to sitting across from women in crisis. Women who felt trapped. Women who felt that no one would believe them. Women who felt the walls closing in from every direction. And she sat with those women differently now. Not with less professionalism, but with more weight behind it. When she told them the truth will protect you. She knew it now in a way that went all the way down to the bone. She had been inside the lie. She had felt what it cost. And she had felt what it cost to choose the truth instead. And she knew without any doubt that the truth, though it nearly broke her, was the only thing that had brought her home. There is one more thing. One thing that Margaret told Sandra much later over dinner at a restaurant they had been going to together for 20 years. She said, "Sandra, I know what I experienced in that house. I know what the fog was. I know what the bottle was. I know what Mother Cecile undid. And I know that some people will say none of that is real. Some people will say there is a scientific explanation for everything I felt during those months." She looked at Sandra. She said, "But I also know that the crack was already in the bottle when Derek used it. And I know that Mother Cecile said covenanted things cannot be fully taken. They can only be temporarily obscured." She said, "I believe I was always going to find my way back. I believe that what Calvin and I have was always going to be too solid to be permanently broken by anything Derek Cole had in his dresser drawer. But," she said, "I also believe that what we are up against in this world is not always visible. And that some of the most important protection we carry is also not always visible. So we had better take care of both. Whatever you are carrying today, whatever happened in the dark that you believe you cannot bring into the light, whatever shame has been used to keep your voice small, this story is for you. You are not what was done to you. You are not the worst thing that happened in your life. You are not the photograph someone took while you were asleep. You are not the fog. You are the woman who woke up. You are the woman who drove to Sweet Auburn. You are the woman who sat across from her husband and told the truth even when her hands were shaking. You are the woman who came home to herself. And no matter how long you have been away from yourself, no matter how thick the fog has been, you can always find your way back. The door is never locked from the outside, only from the inside, and you have always had the key. If the story moved you, drop a heart in the comments right now. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this today, send this video to her. She needs it more than you know. We will see you at the next fire.